Hey, this is Troy Taylor with the Championship Football Coaches Clinic. I got Coach Gary Criswell here. He's going to be talking about the history of the 804 football, and that's in Virginia, the Richmond, Virginia area, Central Virginia, the 804. There's no other video on YouTube talking about the history of the 804 football. So, 757 has a rich history, but Coach Criswell's here today. And, Coach Criz, tell everybody watching and listening on the clinic a little bit about yourself, when you were born, where were you born, and where you coached, and your experience with, 804 football.
Well, I was born in Northside Virginia, East Highland Park. The difference between East Highland Park and Highland Park is East Highland Park's in Henrico County, so I'm right on the borderline. My dad was a fireman at the time. I went to Glenlee Elementary School, right there, right there at Laburnum Avenue. And we didn't have football then. That's the funny part of it is the Great Glenlee Little League had not been created. The first time I ever played in football I was in high school. Back then, I went to Henrico High School, 7th through 12th grade. All right. And people, it's another sport, but my first coach in football was an 8th grade coach named Guy Davis, who went on to be a great basketball coach, a great athletic director. He's a great mentor and a teacher. I played at Henrico and went back there 5 years later and coached at Henrico. And to give you an idea of the stability of the staff, when I left Henrico and returned to coach there, all the same coaches were in the same jobs as they were 5 years previously. So it was a really good time to be there. And you and I were talking about it before we went on about the kind of the standard at that time as I was growing up was Hermitage High School. And the first high school game I saw, believe it or not, was in the old Parker Field, and the end zones were laid out from somewhere around the left field line all the way back to the right field corner. So there was not a lot of great seats, and I remember sitting in the third base side. And it was great when somebody was down. It was a Highland Springs Hermitage game. I think it was the end of the year, and I think I was so young that Highland Springs, I think, was had a down season, if I remember correctly, and they upset Hermitage, if I remember that correctly. And I don't remember being in love at first sight, but it certainly was a great start in doing that. And I had that experience, and I also was my old broadcast partner, Mark Top Dog Smith. His daughter has inherited the head coaching job at Mills Godwin, and I went to watch her coach at TJ, which was in 1963. It was the first time I saw a high school basketball game. And so it's been kind of a memory lane week for me when you add to this podcast. But in my mind, Chester Fritz was kind of the pillar that certainly football on this side of the James River started. And I like to tell a story that you can drop some really great names on this story. But Coach Rinaldi, when he returned from New Jersey, but when he was still here and he was still at the height of his powers at Highland Springs before he returned to New Jersey temporarily, when he was the head man at at Highland Springs, he had a coaching clinic in the Catholic Church right there on 9 Mile Road in Highland Springs, and the staff at Henrico was going to go over there and participate in it and do some work with clinicians and just to have a good time. And it was the first of that kind of clinic that I'd ever gone to, especially locally. And I didn't realize it until Coach Brown, my head coach there, got me to stand up, the staff to stand up, and he introduced us. But he said he left a caveat that every one of the coaches had played for him at either Hermitage or Henrico, and he was Chester Fritz's top assistant, and then he came over and built the program at Henrico, and it was very, very successful. In fact, the year we won the region was also the first year he was able to beat his mentor, Chester Fritz. And Chester Fritz has a kind of range, I think, that still he has. If you see the followers of Hermitage football, and every time they're very, very competitive, they come back and they support the program, as do the Highland Springs alumni. And I think a lot has to do with that. I think people understood it was a very unique program that he had going. He was an interesting cat now, Troy. Later on in life, it took me a while to like him. And I think it was from more of a competitive nature and things like that. But that is basically the epitome of ground and pound type football. But he really produced some great guys with him. I remember Bill Mountjoy was on the staff.
Coach Mountjoy is one of my big mentors. He loves Coach Fritz.
Yep, and I remember him, Coach, bringing it up one week when we were preparing. Coach Mountjoy got a big win somewhere at Colonial Heights just as he was starting that program. I believe that was his first head coaching job was at Colonial Heights High School. Does that sound right, Troy?
I believe so, yeah, because I think Bobby Ross was the coach there before him, I believe.
Exactly. And so, and Coach Mountjoy, I got to know him pretty well through the years. And now that you started the threads and the veins of influence, we're going to be bouncing around a lot. Coach Mountjoy was the original football junkie. I don't think I've ever met anybody that was more of a football junkie than he was.
Man. So it's just like, I told you before we started that I watched Mike Tyson talk to, I think it was Sugar Ray Leonard, and he said that he loved fighters and he loved studying the art of war. And he studied them all the way back to Achilles and Alexander the Great, and Napoleon, and all these guys. And he just said he loved fighters, and I love coaches. And when Customato, who was his coach,
right?
He had coached Muhammad Ali, and I believe he had coached Floyd Patterson.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then he got basically blackballed out of professional boxing by the mafioso, and he went to the Catskill Mountains, and Customato says that he summons Mike Tyson to him, and it seems kind of like Coach Mountjoy is the original football junkie, and I'm pretty much his heir. So
I will tell you this, Troy. I hadn't thought about that, but one time in a capacity before I started coaching, in 1 year, because it was really tight to get a job. I was the youngest teacher in Henrico for like 6 years when I got hired at 77, 78 was my first year. And I actually coached football at Brooklyn Middle School, and then I was assistant under Ron Axel in wrestling, and Bill Garbett, who would win a state championship in Middlesex County later in his career. So
beat Appalachia.
Yeah, and I was on Ron Axel's first team in the ninth grade in 1969. Ron Axel and Bill Garbett were my coaches on the ninth grade team, and it was a very historical time at Henrico because we were basically in a situation where a lot of times that area of Henrico County was going to be subject to a merger with the city of Richmond. I could have easily ended up going to John Marshall. I remember my father taking me to the then new John Marshall over there on Brook Road and saying, hey, you know, if this goes through, this is where you're going to be going to school. But that didn't happen. But we desegregated the team, and that was and in 1970, Henrico won the Central Region Championship, and that's as far as you could go back then. And it became a state pole game. And little did we know that when we lost 10-0 to Douglas Freeman, which was a tremendous program, but it slipped up during the year. We lost to Douglas Freeman in week 10, and then came back to beat Thomas Dale by 2 touchdowns for the championship in 1970. That was one of the last years where it wasn't played on the field. James Wood actually got voted the little known James Wood, which is not open anymore.
They always got voted. Was it
Yeah.
Lane or James Wood? Lane High School.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they got voted in because Hampton and Newport News waited to play on Thanksgiving Day. And we played Thomas Dale at the old city stadium on Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. And I remember being in Hampton celebrating Thanksgiving with my uncle and hearing there that the Crabbers had been defeated by Newport News High School in the 1970 game that they played on Thanksgiving Day. And so that would have put us in a position, had we won, I think we were still excited about it. In fact, there was a legendary DJ named Shane, and he would adopt the hot football teams of the Central region area. And I remember calling his show on Thanksgiving night, back when Stars worked on Thanksgiving night, and they were very excited about that. So that might have been my first stint on the radio. I'm not talking live, but I was taped on it. So it's it's been a great journey for me, and then every little area has a tendency to have their own lore, and certainly we're in an experience right now where Holland Springs is rebuilding that history, because under Coach Rinaldi in the first trip, they were very, very competitive for a long time. He built a good set of assistant coaches, which spins off some more things. The second coach at Lloyd C. Bird was a Holland Springs assistant.
The first coach, Tom Bratton.
The first coach was
Peachy.
Yeah, and then Tom Bratton was the second one. Not to correct you in your home court.
Yeah, I have the yearbook here, and I'm pretty sure Tom Bratton was the first one, and Peachy was the second.
Okay, all right, I'll go with that.
And then Peachy went back to Liberty.
He went back to Liberty, but I think at any rate, Bratton. And that could have happened because Coach Rinaldi went back to
Bratton went to Highland Springs.
Yeah, and so Bratton went back to Highland Springs. Yeah, and of course Tom has become a great resource for anybody that's been in coaching. And he was very instrumental in when I was an assistant coach in Henrico. I got very lucky, Troy. When there were some personnel situations going, the wrestling job was open because Ron Axel left for Mills Godwin. And I had been asked after my first season, after kind of auditioning with Axel and Bill Garbett, Coach Brown came to me during the offseason, John Brown, and pulled me aside and said, said, look, we're going to get the Boosters Club to pay you. We want you up here coaching football. And after the first couple of years, they decided it was better for me to be a head coach. And by that time, I was working University of North Carolina camp for 2 weeks every year. Dick Crum was the head coach. The guy that was kind of my godfather is, and my fairy godfather in college football is a guy named John Matsko, who's now the running backs coach for the Commanders.
And he's from Lee Davis? From Mechanicsville?
No, John Matsko is an Ohio guy, came from the Cradle Coaches, Miami, Ohio, played for Crum up there. But that staff ended up having 4 college coaches come out of it. So it was a big.
John Matsko coached offensive line at any time?
He coached offensive line most of the time. He was at North Carolina. I think he was at Navy for a while. He was with Larry Smith at Arizona State. I think he's been a bunch of places, but he's been in the NFL for a long period of time. So, and I was very lucky. A homegrown Henrico football player became the second coach when Coach Brown went off and did administration, and Coach Brown was there the entire time until I went on to a college job. So I got to mentor that, but a guy named Billy Browning, who was later the AD and helped build a good program at Mills Godwin, was the second head coach. And when that happened, there's a lot of shift around, and I got my own team. And Coach Browning was nice enough for me to experiment a little bit. And I will tell you, I think I could easily convince you I was the first person to ever run 4 verticals in football. I got tired of an 8-man front. So
I mean, who probably invented it? Sid Gilman.
I think that's probably as good as anything. The Zampese's had some stuff to do with it. It's really hard to figure out, and nobody's really tried to claim it as being the inventor of the air raid or something like that. All I know was, and this is another story, but when I was coaching at Hampton, we were perennial Division II championship contender, and back then you could scout live with in Division II. Reason you couldn't do it at levels above that is with the wealth of some of these programs, they could scout every game. Every time you came on the field, they could scout you. So that was not a rule except in Division II and below. And so when it was opportunities, like we played an afternoon game and it was an evening game that we could slide over to, I slid over to the Valdosta State North Alabama game, which was actually pitted 2 coaches, Bobby Wallace from North Alabama, who turned around Temple, finally got Temple winning for a while. He didn't have the success of the guys that came after him. And of course, Hal Mummy, who went from there to kind of an infamous finish at Kentucky. And of course, Mike Leach was on that staff, as was Dana Halverson, who is the coach at Houston, and all very much air raid proponents. And it's about just spreading the field and all. For me, I kind of stumbled on it because I started motioning into 4 wide receivers because I made people get out of the 8-man front. We were looking at that wide tackle 6 that they played at Holland Springs. They called it Springer 6 because it kind of offset the defensive guards, and it's strange to call it something defensive guard. We call them defensive tackles now, but 1 and 3 technique, that kind of thing. And you'd move the out linebackers, but you always had guys coming up the field. And Coach Rinaldi was a personnel guy first. When he came back and built those teams and had some near misses in the state playoffs in the late 70s, he was he got basketball players to play it, the cover three back there. And he didn't take, he figured if you can get it off, more power to you. So there was not a lot of short passing and stuff back then. Everybody, finesse was a fullback trap, and it was tailback oriented. We ran the wishbone in the 1970 season. In fact, my quarterback, who made All-Metro a defensive back, my quarterback is gonna be my guest at the All-Metro banquet next week, Chris Turner, and he was a subject of he and his brother and two friends were the first black players to play at Henrico in 1970, and Lancaster Dining did a really nice piece on that during COVID, and we got some teammates together and talked about it. But these guys were not only great players; they were leaders. They're president of their junior and senior classes, and Ben, the more heralded brother, that when Tess and I put together the top 50 high school players of all time. It might have been top 30, I can't remember, but and it was unveiled at the All Metro banquet. Ben Turner was in the top 25 for sure, and but it was a great experience going through all those kind of things. But I have to say that going back and recruiting for Virginia Union First and in Hampton in the 1990s kind of set the stage for what I'm doing now. A lot of the contacts were set there with Coach Taylor. I got the local feel of coaching at Hubby Field and things like that. But Troy, I want you to consider something. I went from a JV coach, got hired to be the special teams coordinator at Virginia Union. Mm-hmm. And in game 2, I was coaching in front of 47,000 people at the Meadowlands against Eddie Robinson. And the game was 0-0 at the end of the first quarter. A guy from 804 football that played in Williamsburg, Rico Greenhow, was at Mamiya for a while. You would know that. And Rico intercepted a pass in the first play of the second quarter and ran it back for a touchdown. Now, Rico had a tough night. He was a freshman playing his second game. There's a guy named Nate. I'm completely lose his name, but the guy went from there to the 49ers and was part of that Jerry Rice rotation. I keep saying Nate Scarborough. That's because I watched The Longest Yard last night. But it was I'll think of it in a minute. But to give you an idea, it was 47-37, and we beat Eddie Robinson. And I remember we played Livingston the week before, and I put in a bunch of stuff. I faked an extra point with for 2-point conversion with a little shuttle pass, to the blocking back on the wing, just to show it to Grambling if I needed it, because I had a bootleg coming off of it, and we threw everything we could at them. And I remember it was trading football, field touchdown for touchdown for touchdown. We finally stopped them and had an Israeli kicker. And the Israeli kicker from Grambling we held him, and he kicked a long field goal. Coach Taylor turned to me and said, "All right, no more tricks. We've broken the string," and he ended up being right. And Joe Taylor is why you and I are having a conversation right now. There's no question about it. You talk about getting emotional. Now I'm emotional, and he got inducted to the College Football Hall of Fame during the pandemic. A lot of people do not know, even though the Times-Dispatch did a good job picking up on this. A lot of people didn't know in the College Football Hall of Fame, the inductees do not do acceptance speeches. They choose a guy among their class to do that. And they chose Coach Taylor to do that. And evidently he did a pretty good job, because the guy in charge of the football committee that chooses for the national championship was in the audience, and Joe Taylor is now on his second or third year of his term, being one of the panelists that picks the participants in the championship. They cut the lights off on you.
I mean, it's technology, man. You don't move long enough, and the lights cut off, man.
I love it.
I'm in school. Coach Joe Taylor is a legend, and Coach Joe Taylor, I mean, he's a great speaker, like you said. And I mean, he's touched so many lives, changed so many lives, and I mean, he's changed that program over there at Virginia Union again.
Yeah.
Larry Rogers said Eddie was awesome. So Larry, I don't remember which Eddie you're talking about. We talked about so many different people.
Yeah, but it was Eddie Robinson. Eddie Robinson.
Eddie Robinson, the coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was awesome. I mean, he's the GOAT.
Yeah, we got lucky enough when we were at Hampton and you may remember this name. I recruited a guy he was out of Petersburg. I signed his two brothers out of Thomasdale. Tyrone Mayer played for Jarvis when Jarvis revived the Billy Jarvis, another Henrico guy, another John Brown guy. He revived the Petersburg program and got in the playoffs a couple times. Lost a thriller down in Huguenot one time to Coach McPhee. Mike Scott was on that team too, the coach at Petersburg now. Mike Scott, I couldn't recruit him to Hampton. He ended up going to East Tennessee State, and they folded the program on him.
Mm-hmm.
So, but no, Coach Taylor was he was a great mentor. And Troy, there are a lot of things wrong about this game, but the way he went about things, the way he linked academics and success in the next level and stuff like that, a little bit easier to do with college guys than it is with high school guys, but it worked really well. But he truly believed that if you made sure the players were educated and in an educational setting, it would set their mind to go about their business on the football field or better. And I said it a simpler way: if bigger, stronger, and faster wins, then bigger, stronger, faster, and smarter wins a lot. And but that's easier said than done at the college level than it is at the high school level. Just because you have so much not control over their life, so much influence over their life. But it's true, and it also works in a setting where you can recruit. I know you love that word. Recruit your players. You can recruit your talent, and then it's part of the process of filling that. Knowing how to think and be able to break down concepts and if you got a team of fast learners, and you can add a little wrinkle each week, and the kids almost instinctually do that, then you're not only producing really good football players, you're producing future leaders, hopefully in the game. Certainly we need that. But they go about their life in a whole different way. So it's what you guys do is very, very important. And a long time ago, Gary Hess and I, when we got together and the games got some momentum, and more importantly, you guys kept improving the product out there. I mean, it's hard to lose to listeners when you're winning state championships. I mean, we've had, I think we're up to 11 straight years where we've ended with a state championship. And when I started in the late 90s, we didn't have anything until Hopewell broke through.
I mean, there was the Patrick Henry team in 1994.
Henry, but I was still coaching.
But I mean, that was just because of the way that the VHSL decided to classify schools, and the Central Region was broken half and had to play against bigger schools. If it was even then, we would have had more,
Oh, yeah. But I don't think anybody can deny that even with some of the changes happening on the landscape right now, nobody can deny that there are a large number of really good coaches here, and not just veteran coaches, some young guys and things like that. And I think it has a lot to do with it, because there's been other areas that had to adjust, and it hasn't happened for them. But yeah, you're exactly right. There were pocket of programs like GW Danville. It's not hard to, when you've got every kid in the city, for instance, it's not hard to produce a winner year after year. But yeah, it's the bottom line is just give me the opportunity to compliment what I see on Friday night. And it's been magical, the relationship that Gary's been able to build with these people, and with the folks that we look at every week, and I just get to tag along. But you guys have kept my love of football together, and I'm always prepared, Troy. I have a playbook. I'm ready tomorrow. If every eligible football coach goes on and moves on to something, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot. I just tweeted that out. There's only 4 programs in Chesterfield County, which is for everybody. If you're watching around the country, that's south of the James River in Richmond, Virginia. It's the county south, the suburbs. There's only 4 schools that's had the same coach since 2018, and there's 6. Turnover. But when we talk about 804 football, it all starts with Chester Fritz in the 50s. So we're going to have to do multiple shows now, Coach, because this is a lot of information.
I knew this. I mean, I could describe what I had for breakfast today, and we'd have to move on to another show. So, but no, it's been this. I've been looking at these things from time to time, and a lot of X and O guys have started doing this, and I like the fact that you bounce back and forth with stuff. There's a lot of unique things that's happened through the years to us in the 804. A lot of personalities. A lot of guys have gotten their own coaching tree out there. We're inside of a week away from the Touchdown Club banquet. You ask any college coach from Atlanta northward, events like that do not exist, where the best high school football players and the best coaches in a region get together in a big room. I mean, I'm taking Chris Turner, who was All-Metro in 1970, and I don't think they had a banquet then. They didn't choose Player of the Year until 1979. I was already coaching. I was already a member of the Touchdown Club by that time, and I was already coaching in Henrico. So, and it was a private school guy, which is one of my favorite subjects, by the way. But I'm not here to make enemies. I'm only here to make friends. And I have a lot of friends in the private schools, and they understand that sometimes having an antagonist that holds them to the feet to the fire is good for business. And we know who they are, and we know who they aren't. But that's for another night. Maybe after 11 o'clock at night.
So, like, my dad's from Appalachia, and they have a lot of pride in their football in Southwest Virginia with Appalachia and Powell Valley and Giles. And in the 804, like we talked earlier, it all starts with Chester Fritz coming here in the 50s. From what you know, Coach, I know that's a little bit before your time. In the 1950s, and the way that we're kind of breaking this down, y'all, is like we're going from Ashland down to Dinwiddie, from Powhatan and Goochland to Hopewell in the Tri-Cities. And then we got the West End and the East End in Henrico County, and then we got the city, which we're calling kind of like their own entity, and then we have what we call Southside, and that's like Chesterfield County. So in the 50s, I mean, that was before desegregation. So schools were still segregated. So I know you had Peabody and Petersburg, and you had
Maggie Walker
and Woodson and Hopewell. And I think even in Chester, you had Carver. So, I mean, what do you remember or know about that time period from the 50s, other than Hermitage was good and probably, Highland Springs was good?
Okay. The biggest link is I grew up in the sporting goods business. Back when C.P. Dean had sporting goods. And
downtown Richmond.
Yeah, downtown Richmond. And my dad was a fireman who his part-time job became more lucrative than his firefighting job. And I was lucky. I grew up with a dad that I was probably 15 years old when I realized that not everybody's father was on the front page of the paper climbing into a burning building. And my dad was he was pretty much an airborne guy that went straight to the fire department, and I got to work with guys that were in the fire department with him, and he said he was a real deal. But he literally came home so he could do stuff like coach Little League and stuff like that, because back then they were on one day and off the next, and they all worked that second job. So I was lucky that my father exposed me to things like that, including the Marshall Walker Classic. So when you say the start of football, when you talk about great heritage and things like that, if you took all the people that claimed to go to 5 or more Marshall Walker Classics, it would take a 600,000 seat stadium to hold everybody. In other words, it was such a great event, people would pretend like they were there.
So at a time period in the 50s, that game, was Maggie Walker the black school and Marshall the white school?
No, this was the two black schools. This was Armstrong and Maggie Walker.
Okay, Armstrong and Maggie Walker, okay.
And believe it or not, the proceeds from that game funded every dime that they needed in the athletic department. And that included the basketball team having to go all over the place to find competition. They wore a path going up and down 95 to play some of the schools in suburban DC and other places. So that
right there is a whole show in itself, just talking about Maggie Walker and Armstrong and getting some of those guys that, Puka Scott, coach at Highland Springs assistant, and Glenn Lee, he talked all about that. So
Puka owes me a phone call, by the way. So if he's watching this, you need to call me after I'm off, because
yes,
the bet is he's going to call me while I'm on this.
They might want to jump on, but that right there is a show in itself.
Yeah, and by the way, when Coca-Cola couldn't have me on the air enough, we were doing a Thursday night show, and Willard Bailey, Lou Anderson came on the show because the Times-Dispatch, as part of the high school previews, we're talking about, is this the last year of city school football or something to that. The lead story was the small number of players that were playing at each of the city schools, and to bring that back. And it was a very, very, we were really proud of that. A guy named Bill McDonald and I put that together, and we were very, very proud of that. We literally had things like we found sponsors for the program. We fielded calls off the air. We had a doctor call and said he would give a physical for free for any kid playing football in the city, that type of thing. So they're kind of at a crossroads right now. I was at TJ the other night for the basketball game, and they are. There's people that are talking about closing John Marshall. My wife the former athletic director Douglas Freeman, who was in the same district, she said, and this is unlike her, man, but she said, "How are you going to close that with their basketball program?"
I don't know. I want to see what team can play with them because they're probably playing. They're getting paid.
I heard they're making things up as they go along because they're so good on defense, so good athletically.
Oh yeah, they're good.
They can try anything. So I'm not a basketball aficionado. I certainly love it, and I certainly I used to love recruiting two-way basketball players, especially if you could get a guy who could make a good high school basketball team as a backup or a starter, and he was an offensive lineman. I had two of those. Mm-hmm. One of them off John Marshall. And it was back when they showed it on cable, the playoff games on cable. And I was watching, we were at Hampton, and we signed the All-Metro Player of the Year, whose name escapes me, but he was from John Marshall. But I was looking in the huddle, and I saw this guy leaning over a little bit in the huddle, and I pulled out the program because I had been at the Matoka game, and the Central Region had done an entire program with all the rosters back in the golden days, when there was all kinds of money for that type of media and stuff, and paper actually mattered. And I pulled out the program and got him Lamont Turner, 6'4", 270. I went to see Maury Woods the next day and asked about him. He said, "Yeah, he's a little bit late to football, but he's a good athlete, and he's a backup center at John Marshall." Well, that was a perennial defending state champion. Had 100 kids come out for basketball. Frank Treat wasn't going to keep him because he was a big kid and looked good walking through the airport, and turned out that Lamont was a diamond in the rough after a nice redshirt year. 4 years later, he's drafted by the Phoenix Cardinals, and he's coaching somewhere now. I run into him every once in a while, and but the stories. This is why this podcast is good, because there are so many stories and so many things you can just bring up, and you connect the dots and things like that. And I challenge anybody that tries to listen to me, make sense of what I'm doing. Get yourself a whiteboard and start drawing a graph of where I'm going with all this stuff. Because I see you kind of wheels turning and stuff like that. Troy, if you needed a plan, you need to send me a plan. Gary Hess is going to tell you that.
There ain't no plan for me, man. I know.
I love it.
There ain't no plan, dude. I ain't got nothing written down other than that little map. So my mom's from Hopewell. Okay. And she graduated from the old school, which, the new school is actually old, where Myrner Field is. Right. And she went to high school right around the time of integration, when Carter G. Woodson, they started sending some black kids to Hopewell High. So I know Hopewell and Petersburg were really good. I don't know if it was in the 50s or 60s. Oh, but, yeah. The schools in the 804, they all were still segregated during the 60s, correct?
Right. I think by that time, Petersburg Petersburg in 79 won a state championship. And, of course, the two brothers, the Hunley brothers, were there, and Norman Jenkins was the head coach. That field they played on, you can see from the interstate. When my brother was an assistant coach there with Jarvis, back in the day, they had a holdover who was a player, and that was coaching and stuff like that. And he was convinced that Norman Jenkins haunted that locker room. And true story, I can't make that stuff up. And but yeah, Hopewell and Petersburg kept that area. I think they were the highlighters. Matoka was a weak sister back then. That they were, of course, they were so much more of a remote school back then. That was,
Oh yeah, I mean, even when I was growing up, Matoka was like not even a part of Chesterfield to us.
No, I remember going to an SCA concert. I mean, convention at Matoka High School of all places, and I knew they were the Warriors. That was about it. And I knew about the Kersey triplets, I think. I may have that. I may have the triplets but they went on to basketball stardom, and of course they built a really nice program. Gabe Hicks fell into a great situation there. Had Mountjoy on his staff, and of course the Berrier brothers, and yeah, it was that was nice to see. Coach Rinaldi sat in on that thing, and Hopewell was always really good. Kerry Parker, the Parker brothers, Marshall and Kerry, got to know Marshall later on in life. After I started coaching, I remember I was umpiring baseball, and Kerry was a baseball coach. And they had put Von Allen and those guys had put a big hurting on us at Henrico. And of course, he knew I was on the staff. He knew who I was. And he called timeout one time to dispute a call. And he said I was taking it out on them because they beat us 31-0. And I said, Coach, let's get back on the bench. And he walked about 3 steps away, turned around and stuff like that. I said, wait a minute, stop for a second. Come back. Are you serious? And it became.
Me and you have so much in common, Coach. I mean, because I'm umpired myself. I mean, it's crazy. Like when I was a kid, I wanted to be a sports commentator. And it's crazy. Like today, like you just start your own YouTube channel, and you're an expert now. And I mean, Coach McPhee said that he was in radio and everything.
Yes, he did. And it was one of the things we'll do, Troy, we'll and I swear but we'll have a coaching segment, and the guys that I know and the guys that I wish I knew, and we can start from my first impressions to the guys that I got to know later on, guys that I looked up. Because you go to the coaching clinic and you just walk up to guys and introduce themselves and say, hey, I want to, because I was, somehow I ran into, saw you play or something like that. It's just it's still a rich environment, and that's something we've got to nurture. Everybody has a piece of it. You're doing serious hefty lifting at your place. And I'll tell you, there's a few teams at every level that I say for the world to be right, they have to be good. And you're at a program that's like that. In our little world, Lloyd C. Bird needs to be relevant. And fortunately, you're there. And I know you want to go way past relevant, but that's necessary. I would say, and that what that does is it creates or it maintains the tradition you guys have and schools like you have, and they can move on. For instance, is there a stranger program to try to document than Dinwiddie? If you go back through the waves,
all I know is there was Coach Kane was the coach, and then Coach. There was an assistant here at Bird. Coach Curry was the coach. Kerry Parker was the coach before him, I believe.
Yeah, Kerry got him respectable in the 90s, because I remember Jarvis would bang heads with him when he was at Petersburg, and Kerry did a good job there. And then all of a sudden, in 2000, guy comes from Orange County, has a gunslinging son for a quarterback, and somehow they put together enough team to get in the state finals. And they lost to Heritage, which had
Michael Johnson and
defensive
Blackstock.
Yeah, yeah, and Smoke. Yeah, when your name's Smoke, you can go. I mean,
Kirk Newsom was the coach before the year before they won it, correct? Of Heritage. I mean, he was
like Kirk lost before he became famous. Kirk lost at Verona in the state semifinals to God, he'd kill me. The coach before Chilcote.
Bull Heller.
Yeah. Off tackle Bull Heller. And he was a great guy. But it was interesting. The people forget that I was a finalist for the Manchester job.
Which time?
Billy Jarvis got it. When Billy Jarvis got it.
So Billy Jarvis was the coach before Roger Kasem?
Yes.
And then who was it before?
It was Lloyd Swellness.
Yeah.
I'm athletic director. They had a guy named he was a fiery guy. They hired a guy named Mike Angelo, I think was his name. And then Jarvis put that to rest. And I've always enjoyed that time with Lloyd, interviewing with Lloyd. I know I was well thought of because I had several rural schools principals and athletic directors call me after that. I just wasn't ready to make the move from Henrico. I even switched from coaching wrestling to coaching ninth grade basketball at Henrico for 1 year because they needed somebody and the wrestling program was in great hands. And then the wrestling job came open. I went to switch back to wrestling, but I did that to just, back then you needed, if you could do a bunch of things, you could end up in the right situation. But it just never worked out. I interviewed at Verona when Jerry Carter got the job. That kind of ticked me off a little bit because the principal kept calling me mispronouncing my last name. That's never a good sign, especially when you're in the county, the same county. And I also, when Buddy Gregory turned the program around at Monacan, I was a candidate for that job there, and I was a finalist for that, and got to know the principal later on. And when I got out of coaching, I got in the business world with Life Touch, and Larry, I think it's Larry Buchanan, maybe. I can't think of it. His first name is Larry. Larry denied getting up and leaving the interview because it was 3 triplets that had moved from Texas that was coming to Monacan, that kind of thing. So it wasn't meant to be. The good news is I had a good sense of all 3 of those programs were on the rise, and they weren't going to take much to get it done, especially since now that I know what I know as far as the assistants that were on site when those jobs were open. It could have been a good situation. But hey, listen, that's the way that's just the way things are. And this was what's happened to me because of my involvement with Coach Taylor at Virginia Union and Hampton University. It served me so well, and it's been a lot of fun. And arena football did not hurt me any either.
I don't understand why arena football is not around anymore because, USFL and XFL is great, but, it's not the same as arena because it's indoors and it's during a time when you don't have regular football.
Yeah, it's and the problem was in Richmond, and I loved the old brown lady, and I worked out of there for 3.5 years, but the Richmond Coliseum was a very popular place to play in all the leagues we were in because there was no quirks to it. In other words, if you go into the east end zone or the west end zone, it looked the same. That makes a difference in the indoor game. But the crazy part was the location. Had we been in if the arena that they're going to build in Henrico County, if that comes to fruition, and Dennis Bickmeyer, my buddy from the
what kind of arena are they building? Because we want to build one in Chesterfield better.
Well, it's going to be 17,000 seats, and it's going to be basically close to where the NASCAR Hall of Fame was considered. It's going to be right on the thing there. They're building. The good news is we are going to have an indoor track in Henrico County, and that's going up right now on the old Virginia Center Common sites. But hey, listen, it could have been anywhere. In fact, later on, the guy that built Sports Quest, we had competing teams, and wherever the Criswell brothers were, that's who won.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up being at the Coliseum the last 3 years, and it was a good experience. It was the best. It was a kind of a dream job, but dreams turn into nightmares. And minor league sports ownership is an interesting deal.
Why do dreams turn into nightmares?
Well, because we're in a sport where people think they know a lot of football, and that's ownership doing that too. And I'm a Cowboys fan because I grew up reading about the Cowboys in newspapers in southeast New Mexico when I was a kid, and it just stuck with Tom Landry and those guys. And if you're an X and O guy, Dallas was doing a bunch of stuff back then. They were that doomsday defense. They played that offset tackle formation with Bob Lilly and stuff, gave them a little bit more leeway to pursue a little bit more like a linebacker, and it's just a lot of innovations and flashy and balanced offense. It was a good lesson to learn on. Man, we've been all over the place, haven't we?
Yeah, Coach, we didn't really hit the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the 2000s, the 10s, the 20s. So this is going to be the start of a series, y'all, with Coach Criswell and myself. And
we'll pull some people in.
Yes, sir.
We'll find some people to do that. We need to do that because the game, and Troy, if you don't mind, I'm going to run something by you and the people here. Just thought. Fortunately, my 5-year-old grandson decided at the last minute he wanted to play football. And, I don't want to say that my players went on to do great things, but my players went on to do great things in Little League. And a large amount of Glen Lee success after, in the 90s were ex-players of mine at Henrico. And some of them are still at it. But I like the coaches my kids had, but I would make a effort to visit with both sides because, it's the day after game of the week and that kind of thing. And you run into all kinds of people, and a lot of grandparents that are in the same boat I am. And I just wanted to it's something on my heart. It's one of the things that I'll be talking with other people about, not in the near future. But the game's under attack, and and some of the people that are doing it the most damage are the ones that will tell you, and they probably do, they love it the most. And everybody, but you mix officials and you mix child rearing in it, and you do all these things. And I'm looking for a common denominator. And I loved my kids' coaches, and to be honest with you, had his granddaddy been coaching him, he'd be playing the same amount of time that he was playing. He was the youngest, smallest kid on the team. The one thing about it was, and I'm gonna take this compliment in the grave, before they knew who I was, and before they knew I was his kid, his granddaddy, his coaches said, Henry has some dog in him. And that's all I wanted to hear. Mm-hmm. All I wanted to hear, because whatever he does in a competitive nature, that's all I want, is that dogged determination to get things done. But let me tell you something. In this world of participation trophies and championships and shortages of officials and things like that, we've got to take another tack at winning, about winning. And it's not win at all costs. That's exactly the opposite. If you are a youth league coach especially at the entry levels, you should be worried about one thing: the development of your players. Don't worry about your win-loss series. Don't go to your team that lost by one touchdown or missed the extra point and say you didn't want it enough. What the hell is that? Tell a 5, 6, 7-year-old you don't want it enough? Who the hell are you doing that? But the most important thing is it will grow a new generation of people that understand football and want to play it or want to support it because of what it's done for them. So I haven't come up with a phrase for it or anything like that, but I would love to get in front of any group that is getting ready to lead young men into a football season, and let's talk about priorities. Let's talk about what's important.
Yeah, well, I think you got our next episode there, Coach. What's important? Priorities.
Yeah, it is because look, talked to my brother today. He for the first time, he's not going to be coaching, 1,000 miles away in places like Bismarck and North Dakota and things like that. I talked to him today.
Yeah.
And he talked about the essence of coaching at any level is putting your kids in a position to win.
Amen.
In a position to win. And that's not far off from coaching up everybody you have on the team. And instead of participation trophies, I'm handing them an achievement certificate of what they're better at than what they were when they came there. Is the kid better because he found you?
Amen.
And so
this is the last thing I'm going to say, Coach. Then I'll let you wrap up because I got to get ready to do another one on my player Gerard Johnson and Ian Rampink, who was an assistant down at ODU, who's the head coach in North Carolina. But here at Bird, we try to change lives. 2, we try to help get them to the next level. And 3, we help build champions for life. So that's our vision. And if you have anything else you want to say to the clinic, the guys that are watching are going to watch, or how they can get in contact with you, Coach.
Well, because obviously we've got the
at the bottom of the screen it says @Coach Criz. This is Twitter.
Right. That's Twitter for me. Of course, we've got high school football with Gary and Gary on Facebook, which is where I prefer to originate stuff here. But I want to make sure that this knows that this happens. And by the way, I did tell Hess I was doing this with you. Hey, listen, you're doing a good job, brother. This is good.
Hey, I know it's amazing, man. I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just here.
Well, let me tell you something. I fell into during the pandemic. I really had some man crushes on some guys doing some spread offense stuff and things like that. And I started to realize all of a sudden my nose started working, and I'm going, you know what?
I got to get ready to do my other one, Coach.
All right, brother.
All right. Love you, man. Thank you, brother. We're going to do it again, y'all.
We'll do it soon. Yeah.
Thank you.